What is really going on here? You're never going to find out from the media. They're a part of the problem.
Fix the Media, an independent media solidarity production, with your host, Peter Klein.
What? Why are we hesitating? Barrett told us to get law. This is law. Barrett told us to get the system. We need the full scope. That's the only thing that will put an end to this. So let's take it up to Ben, let him decide. We'll take it to Ben when I say it's time. It's time, Robbie! It's time! They knew, and they let it happen. 2 kids! Okay? It could have been you. It could have been me. It could have been any of us. We gotta nail these scumbags. We gotta show people that nobody can get away with this. Not a priest or a cardinal or a freaking pope. You finished?
That was a scene from the film Spotlight, in which one of the 4 reporters on the Spotlight team at the Boston Globe has a bit of a breakdown after years, I think, working on the case. Working on the investigation into the Catholic Church. You know, it was the Globe that blew the whole thing open with the Catholic priest abuse of kids. They got 90 some odd priests just in the Boston area alone. Just in Boston alone, there were 90 priests. So you can imagine the size. And during that scene, you know, a woman who, I forget her name, the actress, she was also in the film, or rather in the series New Detectives, season 2. I don't know her name, but she looks at him with such compassion, knowing what he's experiencing, because there's only 4 of these people. They're in this little cloistered, they're like hermits working on this big story no one else knows about. Well, except the whole town of Boston knew, right? But they didn't know about how they were trying to bring this thing to the public eye. And I just want to snuggle up with her and have her tell me that everything's going to be okay. That's like the feminine that I have, I guess, sacrificed in order to be busy with this work. And you know what? That movie, it really upsets me because, you know, it also won the Academy Award for Best Picture last year. And I have a beef with the Academy Awards. I mean, come on. They're the organization that portrays the film industry as being the sacrosanct, a fundamental principle of American life and history, and it's inseparable. It's such crap. Such crap. And here they are talking about, in this film, protecting kids and look at how heroic the Globe was for doing this. And yet, then you don't think that Hollywood films exploit children and sexualize children? Are you kidding me? It's the height of hypocrisy. But that wasn't the point anyway. The point of that film was not to expose this corruption or to show, look how good we are, and look how awful it was that these kids were abused, and now we've helped in some way by exposing it. Maybe that's true, but the point of that film is not to do that. It's to make American people think that at the Boston Globe, we have this Spotlight organization that's doing this muckraking, very important work. And the fact is, that's not true. That was 20 years ago, people. Nearly 20 years ago. Okay? No, they don't have the Spotlight muckraking group anymore. They don't even do investigative journalism anymore. Welcome to Fix the Media. My name is Peter Klein. I'm your host. I'm also the co-founder of Independent Media Solidarity, IMS. a non-official group at this point, but will become incorporated at some point in the near future as part of a plan we have to do more things that require us to have corporate officers and so forth. We're not going to be a non-profit. And for those who don't know, non-profit organizations are largely crooked, and that's why they are non-profit. Ring a bell, and our show tonight is going to be great. We're going to do a lot of neat things. We're not having a guest. As I've said before, guests are not the point of this show. We're not here to help people sell books or anything like that. We have a plan, and we're executing the plan. But thank you again for joining us, and let's get going. On tonight's show, we're going to spend most of our time analyzing some information obtained from a new Miles W. Mathis paper suggesting that John Lennon is still alive. But it's the information about the Beatles, Lennon, Michael Jackson, and the entertainment media companies that we're going to focus on, as I think it's clear evidence of media corporations spinning the news to conduct and cover up their war of total consolidation. After that, we're going to listen to a clip from John B. Wells' Caravan to Midnight, in which I was a guest, that I think has an inspirational message. And tonight's continuation of our analysis of the work of Michael Cravey is going to be a big one. It was big enough a couple years back for me to create a video report about it, so it's going to be very interesting. So, the name of the show is Fix the Media. So, if you're not on board with fixing the media, maybe that clip gives you a clue as to why you should be, because you don't think there's a connection between the media and the abuse of children by the Catholic Church and by Hollywood and by by pedophiles. Groups are allowed to get away with it because the media will never cover pedophilia. It's just not in their repertoire. They only have so many line items they can go over. And of course, they're also on a very short cycle of something like a day or two, probably 48 hours. That's the maximum cycle that a story can live. So if something involves, let's say, 100 years or 20 years or even a year or even a month of activities, of events that are relevant and interesting and a component of the overall story, that doesn't matter. It's not going to get in the media. So you might take a look at that as a reason to really motivate you to be interested in fixing the media. And I heard on the radio today, I was listening to, I don't really listen to radio, but I turn it on talk radio occasionally just to hear what they're saying. And it was, what's his name? Michael Savage. Michael Savage, that's right. Michael Savage was talking to Trump, and Trump said, it's the corrupt media. The corrupt media are rigging this election. So there you go. There's your 48-hour version. So if you're somebody who can't really deal with or come to terms with anything that takes longer than 48 hours, well, there's your 48-hour cycle, news cycle story. Trump telling you point blank that the media is rigging the presidential election. And it makes all kinds of sense that he would be saying it because it's true. And I do wonder now whether Trump's legit or not. It seems to me like somebody saying that, boy, that's... I know they're going in a different direction now. I know that the scam has to kind of evolve over time, and they're very good at adjusting. They kind of adjust their position, to use a term popularized by Beck. Adjust your position. And they did, and they do. So be aware of that. But at the same time, do they go that far? Would they adjust that far in that direction? I don't know. And I'd say if you're someone of the voting persuasion, I myself am not. I will make sure not to be voting. I will be extra not voting because, most people who vote don't know what they're talking about. They're just doing it because they feel like, wow, if I don't vote, then I won't be registered to vote, and then I won't get a chance to be on a jury and feel important because I've been beaten down my whole life. I'm insignificant, and it's true they're insignificant in the sense that they live in a world that's kind of a false reality in which authority and institutions and the media tell them about how they're substandard, how they don't live up to some, unattainable image that they've set for us in everything they ever present to us. And then they give us all of our heroes through the media, which are all fabricated. So if you are going to vote, though, if you are of the voting persuasion, I suggest you probably need to vote for Trump. If you are, if you're asking me as a loyal advisor, as a trusted advisor, I advise you certainly to vote for Trump. Again, or don't vote for anybody. because that's also an option, and that's the one I'm choosing because it's pointless. As I understand it, the candidate has already been chosen, and it's probably Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton, boy, I tell you, that's great stuff coming out in the news lately from Project Veritas. If you haven't seen it, go look at just look up Project Veritas, and the most recent stuff they'll have will be these video clips regarding part 1, part 2. Hopefully today there's part 3. I haven't looked yet. And I've been told they're going to be doing one every day or repeatedly up until the election itself. Now let's switch gears back to some characteristics of the media, as well as some very interesting conspiracy theory-like information. This segment and what I hope to reveal here as one possibility stemmed from another Miles W. Mathis article. This time, however, I intend to blend a lot of my knowledge of events and perceptions to what Mathis has shared. If you go to mileswmathis.com and click on the link Updates, you'll find the bulk of his research essays. His latest, at least a couple days ago, was on the topic of John Lennon. If you don't know the background on this, well, he and many others either suspect and truly believe that John Lennon is alive. I know, it's kind of kooky. Some suspect he faked his death but don't have any solid leads as to his existence at the present. Others, like Mathis, suspect strongly that he faked his death and is alive today, playing the role of a Lennon impersonator, Mark Stacer. Okay? Now, before I get on with what I think you'll be interested in relative to the media, I'll just add that I'm impressed by much of the work by Mathis and others on this topic, and think that Mark Stacer has an unbelievably uncanny resemblance to John Lennon. That's true, in my opinion. In this paper, which is a follow-up to a previous paper by Mathis, I was most impressed with the analysis of Stacer's voice when portraying or being himself. Mathis used, for example, the interviews from the 2009 film Let Him Be, about a phony John Lennon lookalike pretending to be the real John Lennon, or some such crazy storyline. There are interviews with Stacer in the body of the film and in the making of the making of a documentary that rolls just after the film, in which he's supposed to be just being himself. Throughout the film, as he plays the role of John Lennon and performs for crowds, he has a perfect Liverpoolian accent and sounds exactly like you'd imagine John Lennon would sound at, almost 70 years old. But Stacer's accents and general performance when supposedly being himself sound like two attempts at an American accent. Both are very different and just sound very labored. Well, they just don't sound very good, really. That's the best way I can put it. But as I said, that's not as interesting as some of what Mathis writes about in relation to the Beatles overall and some aspects of their history and the involvement of other entities and, most interestingly, the media. And let's remember that it's through the media that we get almost everything we understand about all of these people and events over time. So Mathis begins by reminding us from his first article that John and Paul sold their 30% share stake in their music catalog in October of 1969. The odd part, though, was that in April of that year, just months earlier, it had been appraised for about $25 million. Okay? And then they sell it, so that was April, then they sold in October. When they sold in October, they sold it for $5.7 million. $25 million in April, 5.7 in October. Now this to me is indicative of Paul and John being only the share owners in the intelligence operation, but were merely along for the ride. To support this, I think is when I read about their producer George Martin turning down publishing shares to the Beatles' early and future music back in, I think, 1963 it was. So that's very early. But, why? His claim was that he didn't want to have a conflict of interest with EMI, being an employee of EMI, which was their label, and also the label of the Beach Boys as well, on the U.S. division of EMI. But that doesn't essentially make sense at all. There simply had to be another reason. Okay, now this is where it gets interesting, as we start to involve Michael Jackson. So keep in mind, the theory we've at least entertained so far, that the Beatles may have been acting as merely lifetime actors in British/American intelligence psyops for probably propaganda purposes. We already know about Sergeant Pepper taking over as the head of the British Security Coordination, or the BSC, in 1947, or 20 years ago today if you were hearing this in 1967 when Sergeant Pepper's came out. It was set up at Rockefeller Center in New York to mobilize pro-British opinion in the U.S. And I have to ask an obvious question. What generated more pro-British opinion in the period from 1947 to the present? Maybe the Beatles? Well, it's a possibility, I think. And although everybody forgot or hasn't been informed about this, the Beatles did experience a major drop in interest in 1966, where they were actually playing to half-empty stadiums during that year's tour here in the U.S. Not to mention that they announced they'd never perform live again only a few years later, which again is a sign that things weren't as they seemed. I could actually go on for years with this kind of evidence, but let's get back to Jackson. Jackson had been with Sony at one point, but later started a public war with them when he started saying Sony and Tommy Mottola were evil. I think he was saying Tommy Mottola was the devil or something. That was in 2002. So in 2003, Jackson was arrested for a second time on molestation charges. Do you think the media may have been involved in that process? They at least were reporting the information and probably hyped up the scandalous nature of the charges as well. Jackson wound up beating that case and was acquitted, but Mathis points out that it was at that time the media began running stories about Jackson's incredible debt. It was basically being reported that Jackson was broke and living on credit alone while having racked up hundreds of millions in debt. So was this a case of the media totally inventing the story to slander Jackson for some reason? Was it Sony planting the stories as revenge for Jackson not playing ball and bad-mouthing them as evil? Whatever the case, the story of Jackson having racked up this incredible debt may have been true, but the media was way inconsistent in their reporting of Jackson over the next few years. And anyone knows that you can't go from being hundreds of millions in debt to being a multimillionaire or billionaire again in 2 or 3 years. But we're told that Jackson went in halves with Sony to buy Famous Music LLC in 2007 for $270 million. That's, so Jackson's half of that would have been, so Jackson somehow was liquid for $135 million in 2007. So the media had just reported that in the previous year, 2006, he had defaulted on a Bank of America loan for $270 million. And there's that same number again, $270 million being used in 2 unrelated Jackson stories, but about his overall financial situation. So that's odd. But in the few years prior, there were also reports from various sources that Michael Jackson's estate was worth billions of dollars. So was he truly in debt, like you or I, can become, where, we might default on some loans, but ultimately can sell off part of our massive estate to pay down all our debt in full? Or is something else going on here? Miles Mathis then adds that Barclays Bank loans Jackson $300 million after having defaulted on the $270 million with Bank of America. Again, why would they do that if he was in such crippling debt? All right, so fast forward to 2010, a year after Jackson's death. The New York Post and Wall Street Journal both report that the Jackson estate made $200 million just in the years since his death, and that allowed it to pay off part of a purported $500 million it owed. But still outstanding, though, was the $300 million it owed to Barclays. But here's the thing. On the very same day as those other 2 reports, the Rolling Stone and Billboard magazine both report the Jackson estate made over $1 billion during the year since his death. Do you see how one might begin to suspect some of these reports aren't based on anything even close to resembling reality? So to wrap up the information on Jackson and his financial situation, We then have Sony in late 2010 extending its contract with the Jackson estate, paying $250 million to the Jackson estate directly. What other terms of that deal existed, I don't know, but there could have been more money transacted somehow. But then we get to the final point that really substantiates the theory I came up with a couple years ago and speculated about in one of my videos on the James Holmes theater shooting story. My theory is that Anschutz Entertainment Group killed Michael Jackson by hypernatremia, which is just killing someone with an overdose of water through an IV. At the time that I researched this, I had no idea that such a thing existed, but apparently you can essentially drown through an IV, and it's not even all that much water that needs to be used, and it's very hard to detect. And the evidence seems to all point to this, but I have to speculate as to why they'd want to kill him in the first place. My theory is that some element of either Sony ATV or Anschutz had an ability to generate wealth, in reality or virtually, using Michael Jackson's catalog as the vehicle. The only problem might have been that Jackson somehow stood in their way. It's not like they stole his catalog or anything. It's more like they killed him possibly so he wouldn't interfere with decisions regarding his catalog that would have benefited these giant companies in some way had they been possible. How much could it have benefited them, you ask? Well, in 2014, it was reported that Sony ATV made over $5 billion on just the Michael Jackson catalog alone. Now, both Sony ATV and Anschutz have subsidiaries that are investment groups, dealing with things like the Michael Jackson catalog. And in the case of Anschutz, his live performances and other merchandise as well. But they are also both owners of major news outlets. So, did they conspire to do all of this by planting whatever news they wanted through the outlets they owned? Well, it's possible. Now, Mathis believes, when you read the remainder of this particular article, which is really about Lennon, but it jumps all over the place because so much of this is interconnected, he believes that Jackson faked his death, but it's even weirder than that because he believes that there was a Jackson double that began playing the role of Jackson, and Jackson went off to live in Abu Dhabi, of all places. And it was this imposter double person that was performing as Jackson and basically playing the role for many years before in 2009 when he supposedly died or was killed. And I will say that in support of that notion, there was a massive tour planned in 2009 in which, Michael agreed to 10 shows. And then after having signed on, Anschutz kept upping the ante, and eventually they got up to 52 shows and he was signed on. And he was having a tough time just getting through practices and he had a doctor assigned to him. It was Conrad Murray, that was the doctor that they blamed his death on, and he got 2 years for a manslaughter charge over this whole affair. But where Miles is going with this overall is he's trying to point us to these corporations actually having a war between themselves, and the corporations we're familiar with are just on the surface, but beneath that are those parent companies or other, what they call sometimes advisor corporations, or part of a consortium, as they say other times, which indicates maybe a more intimate connection or maybe even partnership or ownership. So these other companies do have a financial stake in these deals, like Sony, for instance. I believe it's either BlackRock or Blackstone that is connected to them. And ultimately, where Miles is going with this is that these companies, BlackRock and Blackstone, are part of a Rockefeller empire takeover or attempt to take over all of the music and entertainment industry, which they did not already get all their tentacles into, because their main concern was always news and, television and film, but not so much music. Now, I want to jump to a paragraph here in this Miles Mathis essay, and I think you'll find it interesting, and then we'll take a look at some of the remaining information in here that relates to Lennon's death, because he doesn't believe that Lennon died. He believes it was faked as well. So let me just read this. So that peculiar sale of Double Fantasy, which was Lennon's last record, in 1989 to EMI, is another signal Lennon was alive then. We see another signal of the false flag even before his alleged death, when Lennon and Ono were interviewed by Andy Peebles of the BBC on December 6, 1980, 2 days before his supposed assassination. Just about the only awkward moment in a 2-hour interview is when Peebles asks him about selling his 25% share of Apple Records. Peebles seems to assume it is already a done deal, but John says, quote, "No, not yet," unquote. That yet is also a slip, and Yoko breaks in to say, no. She tells us there is no deal and then quickly changes the subject. But you should ask yourself where Peebles got his information from in the first place, and why there is no current information about it. Okay, so that's the end of that paragraph, but now there's a lot connected here, because there was a purchase of Double Fantasy, just the album itself, before even hearing it, by EMI. And it is curious, because if EMI is part of an intelligence operation going way back involving the Beatles, then you might see how when these various sales take place, because it was just after that MCA purchases EMI. Now, just prior to that, EMI goes out of its way to purchase Double Fantasy. So it begins to make sense how this may be a way in which these companies can hide what's going on, can hide which front company is actually fronting for intelligence, and also that there may, underneath all of this, be this war. For instance, Geffen. Geffen's another label. Geffen didn't really own Double Fantasy, apparently. So neither Geffen nor Warner could sell it to MCA. So as soon as MCA made an offer that included Geffen Records, Geffen had to fake a sale of Double Fantasy to EMI. And basically, Geffen, the reason why they are interesting is that, according to Mathis, and I also see plenty of evidence for this, the entire modern art scene is an intelligence operation. It's intended to, well, it has a number of purposes, but it also fronts for money laundering. For instance, you've heard about these massive art sales, right? This Jackson Pollock sells for $2 million, and that seems like a lot of money, and it may be. Other times, these are in the tens of millions, 10, 20, 30, 40, $60 million, okay? For what are essentially pieces of garbage, many times. I mean, you can look at it in many ways, but most of those ways will involve you looking at it as being worthless when considering the amounts we're talking about. And that these were just simply, and they'll also talk about the sale, but they won't tell you who the buyer and the sellers are. If that's not curious in itself. And so if there's a company that's fronting for the actual purchaser as a means to protect their privacy, how is that not money laundering? But I have a feeling all the establishment institutions know about this. And it also boosts the value of this new art form, which extends beyond just paintings and what you would think of when you think art, but it also crosses the line into books, literature as well. Jack Kerouac, people like that, right? William Burroughs. You must stay tuned for the following 1-minute break, because after the break, we're going to go right into that Caravan to Midnight clip I mentioned and follow up that with probably the best and most interesting and bizarre Michael Cravey clip we've analyzed yet. Tonight's show and every show is produced by IMS and broadcast on the Awake Radio Network and On Air Radio Network. The guys over at On Air are super cool as well. I don't think I bothered to mention that often enough. Don't forget that you can get this and every past show, as well as follow along with the project by going to fixthemedia.com. Go check it out, but only if you can do so while staying tuned to the show. We'll be back in about 60 seconds.
Is the FCC necessary?
Self-appointed arbiters of the public good.
We are the products of the media marketplace.
We are sold like slaves to the likes of CBS and the New York Times.
And they're not going to let their investment go to waste.
You can hide it with FCC guidelines, which aren't safety standards.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Fix the Media, an independent media solidarity production, with your host, Peter Klein.
Join us every Thursday at 10 p.m. on the Awake Radio Network. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that ends after an hour, and where you can see a real-life blade of grass. Those are references to Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, which is sure to alienate me with our younger and female demographic. And truly, they are the intended audience, and the most welcome to listen, interact with, and eventually become a part of our show. So I sincerely apologize for that, and will sprinkle future shows with fresh references to current happenings. Now here's the other thing. Double Fantasy had come out, and it was about 2 weeks after that we had this murder. I believe that's the timeline. In an interview of a guy whose name is Jack Douglas, who was the producer of Double Fantasy and who was in the studio with Lennon on the very night of his supposed murder, that very night. And Jack Douglas is describing to this interviewer that there's audio of everything, every breath that existed from day one to the last day. And what he means is that in the control room where they engineer the music, right, in the studio control room, all the audio is picked up in that control room for everything. I don't know why. I don't know if that's standard practice, but that is definitely what this guy says. And so then Jack Douglas is asked, well, what about the tape of that night? Does Ono have it? And he says, no, the tape of the last day got tossed. I tossed the last day. It doesn't exist. Then the guy asks again, what happened during the Walking on Thin Ice session the night Lennon was killed? Like, what happened? And he says, well, it was the end of Walking on Thin Ice. It was the last day of mixing, but there were some strange things said in the control room. And the questioner asks, like what? I don't want to talk about it. I erased the tape. Things said by Lennon? Yeah, so I erased that tape because it was a real painful tape. So, I mean, what is that about, right? But then this is more bizarre. Okay, now you remember there was a guy that took a photo of Lennon signing a record for Mark David Chapman, his supposed killer, right? I believe. And the guy's name, I think, is Paul Goresh. Okay, now he was known to be outside the Dakota, the scene of where Lennon was supposedly gunned down, and he was filming with black and white film. He's taking black and white pictures. He's got a picture of him with John Lennon with his arms around him from just a few days earlier, or a couple days earlier. But you know the famous photo that we see of Lennon signing the record for Mark David Chapman, right? You may not know this, but in your mind, try to picture that photo in your mind right now. Is it color or is it black and white? Well, it's black and white. But no, see, probably not. It's more likely than not that you saw a color version of it. But of course, if it was a black and white photo, how did you see a color version of it? Well, that's a good question. The original photo was black and white. Now, I'm going to post a link I'm going to either post it below if you're on fixthemedia.com in the body of this show's description. I'll try to make sure to have a link to it in the YouTube and in other places as well, so you can see for yourself. All right, or if you have to search for it, just look for Chapman Lennon photo, something like that. I'm sure it'll come right up. But remember, you're looking for the black and white version. So when you find the black and white version, take a look at it and look at Chapman. First of all, does he look a little blurry? He sure does, doesn't he? Do his glasses look like they're sitting on his face correctly, relative to where his eye is? You know what? I'll tell you what's going on. To me, it looks like through his right eye, be on our left, through the somewhat tinted lenses, you can see his right eye at the very top of that lens. So his right eye is there, and then it kind of chops off right where the frame at the top is, okay? And then above that, though, what do you find? Above that, we have what looks like a whole nother eye. Well, it has to be. Well, if it isn't another eye, then essentially what's happening is you see his eyeglasses are literally at sitting at a 20-degree slant from where they probably should be. Now, that could be in the excitement of the moment or something, so who knows? Maybe, right? But then look at his scarf. Does his scarf look real, or does it look like it was, maybe it's a charcoal drawing, right? I mean, it looks like a charcoal drawing, the whole thing, including Chapman himself. Lennon looks fine, but I don't think I'm buying this Chapman image. So isn't that odd? Now if you look at the colorized version, and I'll show the color version as well. Take a look at the colorized version, and let's just see if we can find, now of course the color version is cropped in, so we have much less of the photo to work with, less of Chapman. His left eye is completely cut off now, essentially, so we can't use that. But it looks a little more realistic, I'll give him that. That scarf, boy, I don't know how they can take that black and white charcoal image and turn it into that color photograph of a scarf. I don't know how you do that, but apparently they did. But here's the dead giveaway. Look at his chin line, right? Find his chin in both photos, and then look at the top slope of his white t-shirt and look at its relative location between the chin and the top of his t-shirt. And what do you notice? You notice it in the color version, it's very close, but in the original black and white version, it's a good 2 inches lower, right? You see far more of what appears to be an attempted neck and Adam's apple drawn in. And of course they damaged the photo somewhat so that it looks either it was damaged or they had to create these little glitches so it could just be, written off as, a scratchy photograph. But of course, in the color one, they do a lot of repair work, I guess, because it looks a lot better. So why I'm saying this or why I'm presenting it is because look at what we're looking at here. We now have manipulation of the photo. Now here's what this is. I'm going to add another part to the story. This gentleman, Jack Douglas, also says, and this is reported and it's mentioned in a few blogs, people debated this issue. It's mentioned that, and it's controversial for a number of reasons, but one is that it's mentioned by Jack Douglas that, and again, on the night that Lennon was in the studio doing some mixing for some other project or for other music that didn't make it on Double Fantasy, whatever, and of course that night, apparently, this Jack Douglas decided that he had to destroy the recording taken in the control room from that night because it was painful. Some painful things were said. Not that it was painful in retrospect, but, We also hear from him that Lennon showed him these photos, these black and white photos that were taken earlier that night. Because this photo was taken earlier before, as he was heading out, heading either back or heading out to the studio, where, these events took place and where Jack was shown by Lennon these photographs. And he said specifically, including the one that had Chapman in it. Now, this is at a time when they didn't have 24-hour photomat on every corner, 1-hour photomat. So how in the hell does he have these photographs with him? It makes no sense whatsoever. And in fact, it can't be true. But that's not true that it can't be true if the rest of the story is somehow not true. Like, for instance, if this photo with him and Chapman was not from that night, and it probably wasn't, if it existed at all. Because again, my theory is this. My theory is that Douglas talks about this photo that he was shown by Lennon, all right? And he says that Chapman was in it because that was supposed to be how this went down. If Lennon faked his death, and I don't know if he did, but if he did, this scenario may have played out where he brought these photos in to go, hey, take a look at this. These are the pictures we're going to use, right? And here's me signing a record, and we're going to put Chapman right here. You see what I'm saying? So Chapman wouldn't have even been in the photo at that point. But Douglas plays along, and later on, when he's telling people, recalling these events, he tells them, yeah, Lennon showed me the photos with Chapman, totally forgetting that it would have been not enough time for that to be possible even, right? Now, ultimately, what this paper really adds up to relative to the media is it tells us, first of all, number one, they're never going to question these things. And they're never going to go into and follow. Let's say we wrap this paper up and we connected it to many other pieces of evidence that proved Lennon was still alive. Okay? What would you expect to encounter when presenting this to some supposedly muckraking journalist at any one of these agencies? Even if you took it to Frontline at PBS or something, expecting them to do a real in-depth thing, right? Now they're essentially co-opted, right? Compromised. But beyond that, the rest of these media institutions are just somehow connected to these musical labels and to eventually, if you dig deeper, probably to the underlying Blackstone, BlackRock, and Rockefeller cabal companies that really are involved and are taking over maybe all of these. Ultimately, I think what we're looking at here when Miles puts this whole thing together is he's saying, and he says it point blank, that he thinks that these companies are essentially consolidating and that there is a war taking place amongst the very highest echelon where there may only be a handful of corporations, giant corporations, mostly involved in media, but also involved in consulting and intelligence, and of course being a contractor for government, or being an actual outlet of a government agency, department of government. That goes for both in America and in Britain. They may be at war, and it appears as if there is one side winning. It would be this Blackstone, BlackRock faction that is pushing Sony out of their business, pushing Universal out of their business when it comes to music. And they're taking that part over. And they did it potentially through Michael Jackson's estate. Because after all of this, I think we're talking more recently, we had stories about Sony actually conceding to potentially sell this division of Sony to the Jackson estate, which, as you recall, they were being portrayed as having, financial difficulties. They were not flush with cash, and yet Sony is somehow looking at being bought. This division of Sony had recently purchased, I forget what it was, but it was $2.2 billion. So their value would have been very high. And how the hell was the Jackson estate going to purchase these guys? And maybe they did. I don't know if they did or they didn't. But we have government and media collusion, and we have the corporatocracy of America and the media and government all interwoven so tightly that it's difficult to say for sure just how much we're going to be able to attack the media to fix it without being confronted head on by the largest corporations in the world, be it whatever industry they're in, and the largest defense contractors in the world, or general contractors for government, and the government itself. And you need to be open-minded to viewing government and the certain corporations or the general business and the marketplaces and stuff. Open your mind to the possibility that these places and these institutions, these groups, may not be who they say they are. There may be a lot going on under the surface, and it may be that we need to adjust our position a bit in order to more correctly target the source of the problem, the root of the problem. And it's a problem, like I've always said, it's a paper tiger. I'm not arguing that these folks are unstoppable, unbeatable. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that they happen to have, it just circumstantially happens that they have unparalleled access to media, right? And so the media is either in part working for these folks, in cahoots with them, or is just simply acting as directed. Or the media institutions themselves that are mostly involved in media are actually calling these shots. And I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think it makes a lot more sense that we have a lot of influence from the world of giant corporations like Blackstone and BlackRock, as well as government. And the government part we already know. So if we need to start being more aggressive and pointing toward these other areas outside of media, then fine. And we also need to be strategic about how we do it. It may be the media stays the target, but because we know these things underneath it, we may need to be more sensitive about how we approach this in terms of our messaging, because in the end, they're going to look at us as terrorists, right? No matter what we do. Just suggesting that the media might need to be changed to serve the public's interest and just to do the will of the public, right? The general will of the people of America and the rest of the world. That in itself might constitute a reason for them to denote us as terrorists. So bear that in mind. Of course, that's ridiculous. And so I think common sense and just talking from the heart and being a real person, which there's none of that in the media. So, I think the American people are going to be real impressed when people like you and I are heard for the very first time. They're going to be blown away. They're going to go, oh, wow, there were real people out there the whole time. And here they are offering to help, and so maybe I'll get involved. Back on January 28th of 2015, I was invited by David Weiss to be his co-guest, actually, on the John B. Wells program, which is called Caravan to Midnight. David Weiss, I recommend you check him out. He's a very controversial guy, but very intelligent and very nice guy, too. And the show was about 3 hours in length. I actually only joined in the last hour. And even back then, it was not clear that the media was the target, but I'll tell you, off and on throughout the program, the media was brought up. We were talking about Sandy Hook in Boston and some other, I guess, hoax or false flag type events. John was actually the one steering the conversation into those areas more so than David or myself, but in the last maybe 10 minutes. We, all three of us, started talking media. And I think we had some very interesting stuff to say, but I think it was actually John in the end that really dug deep, and as he sometimes does, pretty commonly on his show, pretty interesting cat. His show intros are great, but his show outros are even better. But you got to listen to this. I think it may actually tug at your heartstrings a little bit, maybe motivate you a tiny bit. Who knows? Take a listen.
You know what's interesting is back in the old days, I'm not sure they still do it. I haven't heard this announcement in a long time. You know, on such and such, station blah, 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 is required to, renew its license or whatever, and renew its commitment to act in the public interest as a public trustee until whatever date. If you have any comments, come visit us at our physical location. And I'm just wondering, I've been looking around the net to try and determine if, I think it was the radioactive 1927, and I saw another one said 1912, and I'm going, wait. So I'm not even sure that we're going to hear it. Have you heard that announcement recently that our license is up for renewal? And this is what's so disgusting about all of this, fellas. I've said it before. Money isn't everything, but it is part of it. But when money becomes everything, we have a problem. So it's like, well, what do you hope to accomplish with your program? Wells, I'll tell you what, tear down rubbish institutions. And if they're not acting in the public interest as a public trustee, put them out of business, drive them penniless into the streets because of what they've done to the country, because what they've done to the country, not just to us within the country, but what they've done to the country as viewed by the rest of the world. This clown, I'm saying the word clown, of a president up there goes over giving the kissing of Alpha Sierra Sierra ceremony to the Saudis again. And did you know that she referred, First Lady, First Lad, whatever, refused to cover her head and face. So, on Saudi TV, as the beheadings go on, Saudi TV blurs her picture. So you cannot see that she has not covered her face.
Yeah, that's the media. That's the watchdogs, the reporting the truth. Yeah. No, I feel you on that. And I'm actually, one of the reasons why I admire what you do is because of your stance regarding, well, you say institutions, but I know one big chunk of those institutions are media institutions. And some of them are very intimately connected with certain political figures, as we all know, and all of that. So it's a tough game, and I would say that, I've said this before, and I'll just throw it out there. In my frustration, I at one time was tossing around the idea of there being like an anonymous group, but it would be made up of people who had the skills necessary to just go and commit the act of vandalism against the media's transmission capability. So I'm not suggesting we do this, but I am saying that in my frustration at one point, I was tossing this idea around. And I've brought this up with folks, and they've said to me, the gut reaction is, they get fearful, they don't even want to talk about it. But I almost guarantee you, if somebody just wound up doing this weekend or something, and we went home and turned on the TiVo and there was nothing but static, well, first of all, we would wonder what happened. And then we would find out through the grapevine people did this and maybe
pulled the plug out.
Hey, they pulled. Well, I'm so sorry you're not going to get to watch your rerun of Hill Street Blues or whatever the hell it is you're interested in, or some kind of reality programming, because there's a real reality going on outside, and it's concerning, and so maybe you should get involved. But anyway, I thought about that. All I can say is that regardless, if that were to have been done or be done, it would probably be the beginning of the revolution.
Yeah, that'd be okay with me. We're getting to be about that time. Final thoughts, gentlemen?
Well, I'm very positive. I'm an optimist, so I want to make sure that it's clear. What I'm doing here, this is a cost center. This is not a profit center, and I'm sure you're aware of how this works. We are fought on every level by the mainstream. And so I would say that it's very easy to get into kind of a rut or to feel negative and to feel beaten down. But I see very clear signs that we're winning this. It may be slow going, but we're working it.
Yep, I think you're right.
2012, December 21st, was the apocalypse, right? And the apocalypse is the lifting of the veil of secrecy and lies. And it's been lifted, and now all we have to do is start looking and start telling people. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, nobody would listen to any of this, but now people are starting to listen. It's getting easier and easier. The energy of the earth, this earth is changing, and people are waking up. It's in our favor. We need to step out of our comfort zone and start waking up our friends. If every one of your listeners woke up one person a day or one person a week, the world would change so fast, our heads would spin.
It's absolutely true. We got an expression down here in Texas, and it is, nobody wants to be first, but everybody wants to be next. Well, guys like David Weiss and Peter Klein, Wolfgang Halbig, many, many others, too numerous, literally, to mention, they were first. It's okay if you want to be next. Be next. We need you. Let's get it on before we're all too old to enjoy a real taste of what a revolution feels like. A righteous revolution that's not to put in a new boss that's just like the old boss. To shatter those lies with truth. Shatter those lies. And build the future that we can have, not just for us, but for those who come behind us. Yes?
Yes.
All right, gentlemen, God bless. Thank you so much for making the time to be on the program. And we must do this again soon.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.
You heard what the man said. And I'll say this. Exercise caution in your daily affairs. Eyes up, always. Engage. Make ready for what's to come. See you.
And there you have it. In fact, in that clip, you heard John B. Wells himself say point blank that the purpose of his show was to make these very tangible, literal, structural changes, right, to these institutions. I wish I could remember. I would just be paraphrasing and I would be doing a horrible job of it. But you just heard. He did state that point blank. And that's important to note because I'm thinking about all the shows out there. Who else has a podcast? Who else is either a prominent or not so prominent indie media person with their own podcast? I'm calling out everybody at this point. I'm asking the question, do you have a purpose? What is the purpose? And it's okay. If you've got an entertaining show, that's fantastic. If you've got you've got the chops for doing a podcast program or any kind of indie program where you're delivering news and opinion or entertaining, who knows? Who cares? Comedy. I don't care. It's okay to come out and admit point blank that that's what you're doing. If you have a purpose to your show, if you're an activist, right? Activism implies activities of some kind. And it can't just be this, because this is what we're doing here right now, broadcasting my voice for all of you to hear, is pretty standard fare. All right. In our ongoing series, taking a look at the work of Michael Cravey, we will be looking at, it's going to be based on a video that was put out back on December 7th, 2013 by Michael on his account, his Thomas Brinkley account, which was his pseudonym. And the video was entitled, Only Trust What I Say in My Videos. Now, I'd never seen the video, and I was following Michael's work, but he was doing stuff constantly. He had over 3,000 videos in the end, which are still there. And of course, some that we found were unlisted as well, and we don't know how many more there may be that are unlisted. So he was prolific. So I couldn't watch everything, and I never saw this one. But after Michael's murder, after he died, I did see it, and it was heart-wrenching, actually, and I'll explain why. But he actually posted it December 7th, 2013, but he was murdered just like 3 months later in March of 2014. In this video, which we're going to listen to the audio from it, which is fairly brief, it was something like 8 minutes in length in total. I made a video, and I wanted to really highlight and apply a laser-like focus on something, and I entitled my video, Who Borrowed Michael Cravey's Twitter? And that sounds unusual, right? Who borrowed his Twitter? Well, let me explain. And he goes into this as well, and does a great job, but I'll give you just kind of an overview. Basically, what happens is Michael claims that in the time leading up to this, he had had experience with people on Facebook had created accounts impersonating him that he had to call or contact Facebook to have removed. He doesn't seem to dwell on that, but But his Twitter account, what he explains has happened is that he logs on to Twitter on his mobile phone, and he says, which he never does. And he noticed, well, at first he says it asked him to log on, in which he found unusual for some reason. I'm not clear as to why. But then he says he noticed when he was logged in that it was his account, Thomas Brinkley 4, and it had his, his avatar and all of that, or his profile photo, except the tweets that it showed he had sent, which also identified, Thomas Brinkley 4. It was the correct account, but the tweets were not his, and the profile photos that were alongside each of the tweets was someone else's. It was some woman on a motorcycle. Okay? This one's very interesting because this is just a few months before Michael's murder, and, there's speculation that he was losing his mind, and he may have been, and there may have been reason for him to be having difficulty. Who knows if he was gang stalked or if he was involved in something unusual, some kind of project that he was either aware or not aware of. But at any rate, and he proves this as far as I'm concerned by showing, and I confirmed this afterward, but in the video, he actually holds the phone up to show he's logged in on his mobile to the Twitter, through the Twitter app, and he shows the interface, and it shows exactly what he's describing. And then I went later on and confirmed by actually getting a screen cap of his Twitter feed, which actually included those tweets as well. Anyway, now, and also toward the end of this, he then says, and he just kind of randomly puts out there, he says, they could literally kill me. So he's making a reference to his being murdered, and then that appears to have happened. As far as anyone can tell, the official account is that he's a dead man, and he was gunned down by Gainesville police, Michael Shabula to be specific. Anyway, and then and he wraps up the thing by saying, I am literally suffering from lack of communication. And then he point blank asks people to communicate with him. Now, as I say, I did not see this video and did not know that he had put out that request. And so, in retrospect, I'm not sure how I would have handled it any differently, except I probably would have touched base with him. He starts talking about, he says he doesn't want to have all of this out in the open. He says, I just feel like I'd like to sweep this under the rug. And actually what we should all do is sweep all of this under the rug and implement or put in a new system that prevents this kind of stuff from happening. Now, in my interpretation of that, I felt very strongly when I was listening to it again recently in preparation for the show. I was thinking, it sounds to me like what he's saying is he wants to fix the media. And now maybe media's collusion with government is more exactly what we'd be talking about here. But, in effect, some of these social media apps, some of the platforms, Twitter in particular is very strong across the entire landscape of technology, of media and communications. And it's very unlikely that Michael's password was hacked. In my opinion, I feel it's more likely and almost certainly a case of, based on the fact that he's proving that his account was hijacked, that this is something different, and it's probably related to their backdoor shenanigans. Anyway, I'd rather have him speak for himself. So now, keep in mind, this is edited just for clarity and for time, but the meaning is all there and the important info is there. So let's take a listen.
This is actually very, very serious. Do not trust anything coming from me outside of me on video, because they're cordoning me off. Okay, so today I go on the Twitter on my phone, okay, which I never use. It was strangely asking me to log on. It didn't have my profile photo. It has some woman on a motorcycle, but it said Thomas Brinkley 4. And I'm apparently responding or talking to some housewife, one of these real housewives, okay? Alright. There it is. See how weird that is? But there's my profile picture, but look down here at what it says my tweet is. It must be a totally parallel Twitter feed. Maybe people are trying to talk to me. Maybe I'm saying weird things on there. And I happen to strongly suspect that there are a lot of very powerful people who would love to talk to me, but can't, for whatever reason. It just so encapsulates everything that's wrong with this right now. So I said, so the homepage shows that. I take a snapshot, I try to check it, and all of a sudden it looks like my Twitter again. What really sort of showed that it was a problem was I basically ranted about it on my Facebook, which is where I actually post things. Now, you can't trust that either. I've seen people creating mere like accounts basically trying to be me, and I have to report them and stuff like that. But anyway, I do that, and then somebody comments on my status saying, "Stop tweeting me, bro," or something like that. Totally, this person is, see, look at you. Yeah, that's you. He just commented right now. I'm not going to say his name. I'm just going to abbreviate it, AJ. Yeah, he knows what I'm doing right now. That's fine. He's real mad. Now this is why I'm making this video. Okay? Let's see what he wrote me as I'm doing this. So suddenly they are doing all this stupid shit, and they have to now f it all up because they are avoiding the consequence of their actions that would come out if they were to do what's right. I mean, they could literally kill me to keep it secret that they did something this stupid. So very dangerous for me and others. Capitalizing on me. They are using me for as much personal gain as possible, potential for relapse. Now, what is my message to you? What is my message? You don't want things to be in the open. The things, like, I don't even want to, I don't even want that to be in the open. I just want to, like, brush that under the rug. You know what I mean? And let's just, brush everything under the rug, and let's put in a nice system that does not facilitate or allow that stuff to happen. Okay? And you know what? I'm literally suffering from a lack of human interaction. Suffering. I say that lightly because there's real suffering going on. I mean, there's real suffering, real, people going through loneliness and stuff like that. But, if anyone's going to be communicating, I struggle for just the smallest amount of communication out of people. How about they communicate with me? I would love to communicate. Or you guys communicate with me. This guy, communicate with me.
So you can imagine, after hearing my friend making these pleas for human contact, after he was already dead and it was too late to do anything about it, I felt pretty hollow inside, and still try not to think about it much. And in that spirit, we'll move on. Tonight's show has gone a couple minutes long, so I apologize to anyone who, when listening to the show originally, got cut off a minute or so back. I'm also going to start talking faster to help prevent that from happening ever again. IMS and Fix the Media project are in no way slowing down, but at the moment we're working on completing the first draft of the Fix the Media plan, or foundational document. That's been the priority, so we've been doing less work on other projects, including our current documentary, the topic of which will remain secret, but also means I don't have a guest scheduled for next week. That isn't to say we're not going to have one, though, at all, but just stay tuned for that. It's also likely that I may be able to share a few passages or go over parts of the Fix the Media rough draft plan. I'm thinking the section that details how the project is based on a hierarchy of universal rights and principles might be safe to discuss. It's sure as hell interesting, as it gets into how the project's goals are set, which priorities should exist at any given time, how differences of opinions can be resolved, and all of that based on weighing the value of issues against each other using this hierarchy. I don't likely know who you are listening to me right now. Even if I've exchanged comments with you or emails in the past, I'm still unlikely to really know who you are. So in a way, I don't know whether to honestly thank you for listening or not, since you might be ideally suited to joining this cause, yet as we begin to roll out the plan and provide clear and simple instructions for what you need to do to help, you may not. When IMS begins to accept donations to support the project, you may not donate anything despite being very well situated financially, or even have money to invest well above your current life and retirement needs. But on the other hand, some of you are out there right now, whether listening live or on YouTube or some podcast platform later, you might have far less reason to be hopeful that this thing is real, that it's possible to achieve these things that sometimes seem like a dream. And still you have something within you that causes you to keep listening. And I realize all of you out there aren't yet armed with the tools and the direction needed to actually engage and fix the media. And that's because we haven't provided those things yet. And that is our responsibility. I assure you of that understanding. If there's one thing I fret over, it's being able to provide you everything you need to become a hero that does some things important and contributes to the movement we plan to start. And that's something I hope will be so satisfying that it elevates you out of anything that you had been weighted down by or making your life too challenging. I don't know. I thank you nonetheless. And just do me a favor and don't yet rule this out. Don't yet forget this is real. We're going to do this. We're going to change the way the media is structured and how it practices. And it will happen sooner than you might imagine. But certainly if you don't even believe it's possible, remember, paper tiger, paper tiger. See you next time.